Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Chris Keller with us. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, back in 2007, you founded followup.cc. Tell us first, what is followup.cc?
So it is the easiest way to embed a reminder in an email. Basically, it's kind of the missing feature from all email these days, and it's a great way to just manage your inbox.
Yeah, now tell us how it actually works with the subject line, the blind carbon copy, all that stuff, because it has a really clever kind of mechanism that makes everything run.
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. It was like, how do I say when I want to be reminded to follow up on an email I send? And so really the only way to do that privately is to put an email address in the BCC field that indicates when you want to be reminded. So that's exactly what you do. You can say, say 3 days at followup.cc. You can put 1 month. You can put January 30th. You can put, Friday at followup.cc. It's like a very easy syntax to figure out. And so you just put that in the BCC field and you hit send, and then it comes back. And then the really nice thing about it is when the reminder comes in, there's these what I kind of trademarked as snooze links in the reminder email. And so you can literally just one click and you can snooze the email for another couple of days. So basically that's the combination there of get a reminder, snooze it. So that's kind of the BCC. In the CC field, it's public, right? So the recipient can see that you set a follow-up reminder. So what that does is actually send a reminder to everyone on the email.
Yeah, no, that's great. Tell us some of the use cases. How do people use Follow Up CC, especially people like entrepreneurs and founders, since that's who's watching this?
So it's actually really popular with startup people and, both CEOs, biz dev. I mean, everyone these days, in startups is doing too much in email. I think the main use case is, again, that I send an email and I don't want to have to remember to follow up on this by a certain time. It's like, how do you basically keep your email on track? How do you keep your conversations moving and not lose them and not let them get behind? So that's like the first use case is I'm plowing through emails, I'm sending stuff to people, I'm BCCing follow-up, making sure that, people are replying to me in time and everything's staying the way I want. The other really big use case is that people get emails in their inbox and they're like, I can't deal with this for 3 days, or I don't want to deal with this right now. So they'll actually forward the email to say 1 day at followup.cc. And the main benefit is that, A, it's out of your inbox. You can just hit archive once you send it, you're done. But the main benefit is that whether you're an inbox zero person or not, that thread is coming back to the top of your inbox, in a day. And so for those people who don't clear out their inboxes, I never even knew that most people, when they lose emails, it's because literally they just keep moving down the inbox as more come in, and then they go to page 2, and it's like they never get to it.
Uh-huh.
So that kind of solves that problem. It's really just it's really the making sure I don't lose an email, or that I always remember a conversation and it keeps going. And then there's I'm not going to forget to reply to a conversation that I really need to make sure I do at some point.
Yeah, so if you're the kind of person that finds yourself in email and then taking notes or putting things in some other place because of what's happening in your email, you're probably a good candidate for Follow Up CC. Would that be right?
I would say there's a lot of reasons why you're a good candidate.
There you go. So just to make sure I'm clear on this, you're a one-man show, is that right? Started this by yourself and still run it by yourself?
Yeah, it's been an interesting evolution. It's a little bit of that. It is still one-man shop. The main thing is that it actually started as me solving my own problem, and it was a side project for a long time because I was running another VC-backed startup, so I couldn't go and just do this. And I was just doing it to solve my own email problems. And then eventually, over time, it got to a point where the inbox got hot and people are using the service and telling me how great it is. And I was like, man, I really got to give this a full-time shot and turn it into a business.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is because that is a very different story than some of the other people that come on the show. A lot of the people that come on here, they're already at VC-backed companies, and so it's just a different story, a different kind of thing. So I think people will get a lot out of that, seeing it as a solo founder there. How much does a product cost? There's a free version, right? But then there's also some paid plans.
Yeah, so I certainly want people to be able to use it every month in low volume. So there's a persistent free plan, 20 reminders a month. And then basically once you start getting close to that, it's $5 a month for like 100 reminders and a great calendar integration. $10 a month gets you response detection, which is actually what people really like. Of course, with all the features of the previous plan. And that goes up to like 250 reminders. And so most people are on the $5 and $10 plans.
Yeah.
And then there's a $15 plan, which is really more for like either super high volume users or people who want a Salesforce integration, in which we actually do things that Salesforce doesn't even do, in terms of like recording the emails, creating contacts and leads and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about the growth of followup.cc. You launched it in 2007, which seems like forever ago now.
It is.
And so let's talk about that first year a little bit. Because like you said, there was a moment when you're like, wow, I need to give this a full-time kind of push. So my guess is that in 2007, it was very much a side project. What kind of growth did you get in that first year? Tell me about the side project, followup.cc.
So yeah, I might have to shift that statement a little bit. So I launched it in mid 2007 before like anyone else had even thought of this concept. And the thing is, I just used it for myself. But when I built it for myself, I built it as a service so that I knew like other people could sign up and use it, which is usually what I do with anything I'm building, of course. So anyway, so I had friends start using it, and they really liked it. And so really it was just the so-called like friends and family like using it the first year. And then in like later 2008, early 2009, I started like really starting to iterate on the product more. Because again, like I was still working at my other company. But I started seeing more potential in what I wanted to do with it, and I started making more time. So basically, it was about around the summer of 2009 that I actually left my VC startup and was like working on this for a while and really iterating. And it was around then too that it started to get written about, because now it was like a full-fledged service. Anyone could sign up. There wasn't a pay plan or anything. It was just come use this clever type of product, you know. And so that's when it really started, was just like in 2009, I started getting a press hit here, friends talking about it, tweeting about it, and like slowly but surely it started to like gain more momentum.
Yeah. So after the friends and family, where would you say your primary traffic kind of came from for that next segment, you know? Not where it is now, but right after friends and family, you said there was tweets, there was a few press mentions. Was that it, or was there any other kind of growth mechanisms there?
You know, I have to say, I mean, I honestly think it was a couple catalyst type press mentions that I didn't even try for. Like basically I got written up on Lifehacker, and that just initiated like a cascade of signups. And I think from there, it just, the inbox was getting hotter. So it was definitely kind of one of these classic, it was like the right app for the right market at the right time type of thing. And so, you know, it just, people were talking about it, people were sharing it, and like no one had seen anything like this before. So every time someone saw it, they were like, that's so simple, so clever, like works in all email. It was, you know, so that, you know, I have to say, like, I think there's always, a lot of the time, there's some bit of luck on these initial growth stories. Sometimes it's very calculated, and more power to those people. But like for my case, it's like, since I was still kind of working on something else and I'm just getting these press hits, it was like, that's great. It's, you know, this is more an example of build a good product like people want to talk about and share, and that happened to be the case here.
Yeah, and it seems like you hit upon a very early product market fit where Lifehacker picks you up. I mean, followup.cc and Lifehacker, that's a match made in heaven. I mean, Lifehackers love that kind of stuff. You know, I'm a big fan of Lifehacker. You know, I read it, you know, when Gina was still there and doing it day to day and stuff. And so is that one of the takeaways, is find your market fit as soon as possible? Has that been a good market for you since then? Or have you really just grown way beyond the Lifehacker kind of crowd?
No, I will say that like I think Lifehacker as a press channel, I still think they actually deliver very educated users a lot of the time, and just volume, just a lot of new signups, right? Um, but yeah, I will say that I think the type of user that I've seen become a good customer has not necessarily been like the Lifehacker reader, because if anything, being an educated user, most people, and an internet user, a lot of people still think like, oh, there's got to be a free version of this somewhere. There's got to be like, some other way to do this because, right, we're all little hackers. So now I started seeing over time as more people knew about it that there was definitely a focus more on like the business user or the sales guy, and or just the CEO who's not, Mr. I'm going to hack my life with everything in tech.
Yeah.
So that's been a good transition to see.
Yeah, you hear people talk about, is your product for people that have more time than money or more money than time? And it seems like early on it's for people that had more time than money, where now it's kind of the opposite, which is what you have to eventually go toward if you're going to make a real business, is people that have more money than time. They don't want to hack the system. They just want to pay you because that's why they're paying you. They don't have time to do that kind of stuff. So yeah, that makes sense. So now since 2007, 2008, 2009, kind of the early days, you got some initial users, friends and family. You got the Lifehacker group kind of coming in, using it. How big has followup.cc gotten since then? I don't know if you release exact numbers, but maybe just in generalities, so we have an idea of the scope here.
So it's, I would say that most of the growth has actually been in the past year or two. In a sense, like actually since I started charging for the product, there's been more growth. And we have many, many thousands of customers and like some multiple of that in active users, whether free or paid. And then obviously we've had the normal like signups and some churn, or signups and people don't become an active user or they churn over time. But we've easily cleared millions of reminders set. I mean, it's a decent amount.
Yeah. You said something really interesting, that when you started charging, you actually had more users. Is there any insights you have on that? I mean, it seems very counterintuitive when you're not around this kind of stuff a lot.
I think it's more, I think it was more the timing and the like it becoming an official service that people can pay for to solve a problem, and that it got talked about as a tool in an app versus just being like some kind of clever thing that someone built. I mean, people kind of said like, okay, this is a business, and other people had started paying for it. I'm not going to say that like charging led to growth, but I do think that businesses, as one example, I mean, businesses feel better actually if you are charging for the product. They know you're going to be around. They know there's going to be some support. And especially if you're good at customer service, which I strive to be, and I think most people will say I've been very good about it. They like that. They'll be like, wow, I'm totally happy to pay for your service because I got such attention that I don't even know like how you did it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's certainly been a big win too, because then they tell me that they recommended it to like all their colleagues or all their friends, and I'm like, great, like more the merrier.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said a lot of the growth has really come in the last year. Where do you see that growth coming from? Is it still people in the press talking about you? Is there anything else you've kind of done on purpose as a strategy? Where do you see those people coming from?
So there's a couple things. So one thing that I think people forget about is that press is a great it's a great initial boost. And obviously everyone talks about the jaded, like, let's launch on TechCrunch or let's get written on. I can say that I have gotten 10x more signups from Lifehacker than I did from TechCrunch.
Wow.
And I don't even know the scope of their readership, like how much bigger one is than the other. But it's, again, just goes to show the like type of user and like what they're doing with their day and the other things they know about or want to find out. But with these press hits over time, you get these like spikes and you get, some initial traffic, and then of course it dies down. But I think what a lot of people forget about is when you get written up on these good like sites over time, and the SEO value increases, right? So like when I look now at all the places I've been written up, it's like some really big domains with great, SEO juice, as it's called. And so I think like now a lot of it is just people, I mean, Google has become a pretty good resource just because people are searching for this type of thing in general. And so then all of a sudden they're landing on my site, whether they found some review or some mention. And so I see that probably as the number one thing that drives new customers. Mm-hmm. But obviously the service itself drives a lot of repeat visits in terms of just, not in terms of growing users, but in terms of like engagement. But the other thing that in terms of growth, so the product, everyone, it's kind of annoying when everyone says, oh, you're an email, that's totally viral. And I'm like, no, email is not inherently viral unless you have a message that's like in every email that's going out. Uh-huh. And so follow-up is this kind of service where the first value is private to the user. It actually has the opposite problem of most other startups, which is that it doesn't actually need a lot of people to be useful to the user, which is like, the whole social network, marketplace type app, which, you need millions of users for it to be valuable. Yeah. But then you have the opposite problem now where it's like, okay, someone's willing to sign up, use it, even pay for it, but then what incentive do they have to tell other people? And so the CC field is obviously a potentially great viral method, and it's proven to be somewhat so, but I think it could be maximized even more. And so, again, like just going back to what I said earlier, when you CC a reminder, the message goes to everyone. However, the first time we see someone on an email we've never seen before, we actually send them an email explaining that, Bronson just set a follow-up reminder on this email. Here's what follow-up is and why. Because if they get a reminder like a week from then, they're going to be like, what email is this that I just got? Mm-hmm. And even then, they still may not remember even a week later, right? But that's kind of like we're using people's willingness to set a public reminder. We're using that willingness to educate the people on the email about what it is and why they should try it.
No, that's great. Are you seeing users come in from that, new users, where they're on the receiving end of the carbon copy and then they get this email explaining it and then they become a user? Do you see that cycle happen?
Yeah, it's not as high volume as we'd like it to be. Like I would like to further incentivize people to use the CC field. But you really have to educate people on the use case, right? Because I don't want someone just using the CC field willy-nilly, because either they're going to embarrass themselves potentially with like reminders they're setting, or they're going to annoy someone. So there's like very specific use cases that it really adds value. Yeah. But I see it, in our stats every week. There's like some new amount of users that came in through that, and it's like that's one of those nice metrics that we can just look at and be like, okay, is it growing? How are we facilitating this?
Yeah, you mentioned your stats there. What do you guys use to track your stats? Is it all in-house stuff, or are you using off-the-shelf apps to track things?
So ironically, we for the email stuff, we're actually we use SendGrid as our email service provider, and they actually provide literally a one-line statistic that, in a sense, is all we need for that specific email. And obviously, too, we track internally, like if you sign up through one of those emails, we associate with who you signed up via. Because obviously in the long term, as we build in more referral and incentive type programs, we can even do it retroactively and say, like, you referred all these people last year, like, here's the benefit you're going to get.
Yeah, no, that'd be great for a long-time user that's, poured into the system to get a little bonus like that. Have you done anything with pay-per-click? Have you tried any other kind of marketing channels? Have you found those to be good or bad, or you just don't care about them yet?
So I have not. I did a teeny bit with PPC, and I even tried like the LinkedIn ads and stuff when they first came out. And the LinkedIn ads were interesting, and I think we got some customer signups from that. I don't know the churn rate on that ad cohort specifically, but overall, no. Like, we haven't really done PPC, and I think the main reason though is just the email is such a big world, and I think people forget that you can try to target a certain type of user, whether it's a sales guy. It's almost, you have to do more tests, which we still have to do. I mean, we haven't done enough of it, but you have to do more tests with like landing pages to say, here's follow-up for the salesperson, here's follow-up for the CEO, here's follow-up for the admin, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe try to go after that user in a PPC or social way that way. Because otherwise, like, you can make a campaign that's just totally generic, like, want to follow up on your email? Like, I mean, people actually do search for stuff like that, but it's like, where's going to be, it's really hard to identify the type of user that, it's really just hard to identify that type of user through a PPC ad. So honestly, no. I mean, we could certainly spend more time and money on that, but we just haven't to date. I'd rather just kind of keep iterating on the product, go back to, in fact, the press places that have covered us before, and have them talk about our new things that are going on. Mm-hmm. And obviously we don't want to we don't try to excessively build on the product. We don't want to make this a feature mm-hmm. fest, but it's like, it's the classic, I think, getting content out there, having people talk about use cases, giving more and more examples of the way people use it.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. You mentioned earlier that you guys have churn like anybody else has churn. Everyone who does software as a service, that's the number they don't want to deal with, but they have to. What have you learned about reducing churn? Have you reduced it over the years, and have you learned anything about it? Because I mean, when I think about your product, I'm like, man, I don't know what I would do to reduce churn. Like, I don't know what the incentives are. I don't know what I would change. It seems so straightforward. I don't know what things you can play with. You know what I mean?
So you're right. There's not that many variables, but there is there's a couple things, right? Number one is education on the product, because I would say 80% of the time, if someone churns and we ask them like for more detail or we read the reason they left, we'll say like, did you know about this? Or did you know you can do what you asked about or said in this thing? And, it's just like all of a sudden people are like, oh, yeah, no, I didn't know that. And then they like re-sign up. And we're just like, well, you were, like, it didn't, I mean, the page there's not that much complication, but it's also assigned to us like, oh, we need to do a better job of like displaying this info and educating. Mm-hmm. But I would say the number one thing is just how quickly people get the service into their workflow. Mm-hmm. If people get the service into their workflow, it's very sticky. The number two thing really on reducing churn is just making sure people get into the workflow and remember to use it, making it as easy as possible to use follow-up. And so we actually have some new product stuff coming down the pipeline on that very notion of like, let's make this easier to use. And follow-up is already very easy to use, right? Like in any email system, it's just a piece of cake. However, I was going to say that as interfaces change, it can actually be a little harder to get to, say, the BCC field or the CC field, like that kind of thing. And if you can tweak those, then obviously you can make it even easier. And of course, there's other like common retention things like sending a digest email or checking in with them if they haven't, set a reminder in a couple days. Like all of these kind of like modern techniques these days to stay like in the user's mind. And then obviously there's classic things of like writing blog posts and just sending them as an email, like in a newsletter, that we don't do enough of that. And that's like the number one thing we could probably do to like keep our brand, front and center with people.
Yeah. You mentioned the exit surveys, and we had, I think his name was Joe from Sprintly on here. And he talked about how so important that was to do exit surveys to learn, but you used it as kind of a way to turn them back around and get them back in the product. Do you do that on every user that leaves? Is it just kind of a random sample? I mean, how important is that to you guys?
Well, thankfully I can say that we don't have so much churn that like we don't have to do a random sampling. We can essentially like scan our dashboard for it. Mm-hmm. But when a user cancels, yeah, I mean, we just literally ask them the one question of like, tell us why you're canceling, and please be specific, just because it helps us learn and whatever, we value the feedback, and then mm-hmm. and people have to type something in. And so like based on that, some people have written us like paragraphs, which are great, mm-hmm. And then other people type like one sentence, and then we're like, why exactly did you do that? And we try not to be annoying about it, obviously. If like someone doesn't respond the first time, we leave it alone. We don't obviously follow up on a churned customer.
Yeah.
But but it's just trying to really understand what the problem was, and if we see a way to help, like we'll obviously do it. And sometimes we tell people, hey, you can do this, or there's this like other way, and they'll be like, oh, that's great, and then they'll be like, okay, well, I'm still not going to re-sign up, but great to know, and I'll tell other people. And it's like, okay, fine, like you can't win them all, but
yeah, exactly.
but we've definitely brought back a lot of people, and it was mostly an education issue.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good to know, so you know where to kind of put your resources now. So what do you know about growth now that you wish you had known years ago? Kind of looking back from 2007 to 2013, what are the missteps you made that you wish you could kind of do over or do it differently in terms of growth?
So I think so it's kind of interesting, right? Because the whole internet kind of web 2.0, etc., in that time frame has like evolved so much, because it used to just be about page views, impressions, advertising, and then like in 2009 that like kind of all started to not look as attractive. And I think the main, so here's an example. Like people all the time say to me, oh, just put in the Dropbox referral model. And I'm like, do you understand why the Dropbox referral model really works well for Dropbox? I was like, because it's really, really tuned to their business. And like most people just say it generically because it makes so much sense, right? Give someone an incentive and give the friend an incentive, so everyone wins. It's like, totally agree with that notion. But the way you structure the pricing and the plans and how it's metered will affect any referral program. And I think that's where then I can simply say that a Dropbox referral model does not work well when you reset reminders every month, right? Because Dropbox's whole thing is based on the fact that they know you're going to use up that space eventually. And so, so my takeaway was, I kind of wish that back even in 2009, 2008, I had known to think more about referrals, incentives, and how to structure that. And granted, you're not going to get it right the first time potentially, which is another point, which is build the product in a way that you're agile enough to try different incentives. Because I know as a programmer as well, it can be really annoying to like go and build this entire referral system, and then it's like, this isn't really working, and you want to try something else, and you're like, oh, I got to scrap it, or like, unplug it and plug something new in. I mean, obviously, great programmers can just design these things to be as painless as possible, but when you build up that like code base over time, it can get frustrating. So I kind of wish that I had tested more on referrals and thought about that as it related to pricing and growth and just the type of business it was going to be. Because obviously, too, people thought, whoa, followup.cc, I mean, you have all these reminder emails being generated, you can make money on advertising. And it's like, yeah, you can make some. The funny thing is that 2 years ago, there wasn't a single person who advertised an email unless it was just like a massive newsletter that was one generic email. Like no one has done an ad network for transactional email, which is really what followup is. So, it's again, like I didn't think about that as a business model or then that as the growth. I didn't think about that as the growth factor really, because I didn't want to rely on ads. I was like, there's enough value in this product, people are going to pay for it. So, looking back, I think it's really just, I would tell people to think as much as possible about all the ways you can build in incentive and referrals into the product so that if you've built a good product, then they're probably going to work. And if you haven't built a good product, I mean, then no one wants to share it anyways. So it's like, it's kind of a two-pronged, like first build a good product, but make sure you know how to get this thing incentivized and out there.
Yeah. How do you incentivize people right now? Because you talked about, Dropbox, they have their own world, their own, they have their own currency. They have, this data, this space they can give you. What are you doing that, is different to kind of incentivize your users? Or are you still kind of in the middle of figuring all that out?
Yeah, so actually, that's a very good point. We have thought a lot about different ways to do it, um, and we have not pulled the trigger on any of them because the growth has generally been good, but it's also been it's a little more what I alluded to before, where we've like gotten to this large enough code base now that it's like it's a quite an endeavor to do that. And so, anyways, my point is, it's something we are working on. Like, we actively think about it and need to do more. And we've tried little things, but they weren't even worth like talking about.
Yeah, you mentioned something a couple times that I want to hit on just for a second. Kind of the fatigue, the programming fatigue of you build it, it doesn't work. Now I have to do something different. You know the trial and error. From the outside looking in, if we're just talking pure, growth hack, we're like, oh yeah, just try a bunch of stuff and see what works, see what doesn't, and then tomorrow try something else. But the reality is, like, it's very fatiguing. I mean, I know this personally. Like, when I'm working on projects, sometimes I'm just like, do I have it in me to try one more iteration to see if I can get the numbers up, or do I just want to leave it and just be done? That's a real thing that nobody's ever really talked about on this show.
Yeah, and this really, I think this is particularly poignant with smaller startups where it's just a couple guys, couple co-founders, or a single co-founder. Obviously, like, if I had a full-time dev guy, who knew the whole code base really well and all that, I would. It would be a lot easier to just say, like, here's your assignment. Don't resurface until it's somewhat there. Trial and error does get it gets tiring, it gets frustrating, but this is also when they talk about the passion for your product and for like really trying to make this work. I mean, you do kind of have to just try these things, and you have to put things out there, because I think the classic notion of, I can come up with a lot of stuff, and if I don't actually test it on the user base, like, I don't really know what the reaction might be. Because it's the classic thing too of, I'm trying to think as a customer, but I can't really, because I already know so much more than them about the product, the business, and then when you put something in front of someone and all they just see is that one email or whatever, and it's like, and they just think like, oh, that could be cool, and they just try it, right? And then all of a sudden it can be successful, and you're thinking, well, they're going to think this, and they might think, and it's like, you really can't predict it. So I do think you have to find a way to re-energize yourself to keep trying, especially when it comes to user growth, right? Because ultimately that kind of matters the most. Aside from having a good product, it's having the user growth. So. Yeah, you got to keep chugging. You just can't stop.
Absolutely. And then, like you said, you have to have passion for it, because that's going to let you try again different things. And I like what you said, like, you know too much about the product. I mean, even me right now, I'm writing copy on Growth Hacker TV. Like, what do I want it to say below the logo to get their attention? And I write it, and I literally, like, I'm thinking, I know so much. I don't know if what I just written is awesome or horrible. Like, I literally can't tell you if these 2 or 3 sentences actually mean anything to anybody. So I have to like show it to random people, show it to the target audience, show it to other people, and just be like, all right, what do you think when you read this? And then we try it and we test it, and we're like, wow, it's converting really well. Didn't think it would, or whatever. So you're so right. You just gotta try stuff, because as much as you are the target audience, even if you are in the target audience, kind of the 37 signals, scratch your own itch sort of thing, you're already too close to it, so now you're not the target audience that you once were, because you're too close.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is too when they talk about great design, and they talk about how simplicity wins, but also that simplicity is really hard. It is really hard, because you've essentially said you're going to take your knowledge of everything and distill it down. And so that is a lot of thought, and it's a lot of like thinking about what really matters, mapping it out, and just being like, this is the one thing I want them to think or see and think, and then hopefully this is the next thought or action. And it's hard to distill I mean, it's like programming, right? You have to think of all these edge cases and then handle them. And in some sense, you're doing the same thing in design, where you're saying, I've thought of every edge case here about what you could do, this is the simplest thing to get you to do one thing.
Gotcha. Do you find that hard? Do you find the design kind of being like programming in a sense where it gets bloated and then you got to chop it down? It gets bloated and then you got to chop it down. Do you go through that process with design as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly, I think there's kind of two aspects to design. For me, there's the one that's just the actual look and feel and usability, and then there's the information design, right? So even on like a follow-up reminder, there's a certain amount of information that's really useful or just what you really need, and then there's the extraneous info. And so, for example, I mean, I remember when I was creating the follow-up reminders, it occurred to me one day, I like got this reminder and I was like, wait, when did I create this reminder? And I was like, I've got that data. So I ended up actually sticking that value into the snooze box, and it said like created on. And over time, I've actually used that. Like, it was useful information, but there's still like that much more info I could stick in that snooze box. And it's always I'm always like, okay, I can't let this thing get any taller. Like, what is essential, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously with email too, you can't do anything dynamic. You sort of can nowadays, but it's still kind of rare. But like in general, you have to think of emails as static, and so it's like what's really the info that they want to see here.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, let me ask you some high-level questions about growth in general. You mentioned earlier some of the things that startups get wrong, trying to imitate Dropbox without understanding Dropbox. We actually had Yvonne on the show, who was the growth hacker at Dropbox that gave them 12x growth, and he really got inside the psychology of what they did there. And you're here and you're like, yeah, that's not just, hey, let's apply that to over here. There's a lot going on there that's very germane to them. Are there any other things that you see startups do that, just they consistently get wrong with growth?
That they consistently get wrong. I think one of the things is when they make the hurdle to use the product too high in whatever promotional thing they're a part of. So let's say I've gotten emails before about new services, whether I was like on the beta list or I signed up because I was interested. And like sometimes I read the email and I don't really know what they do, or I don't have any clue yet how to use it for me, like what the context is. And so I think there's that, coming back to the psychology aspect, it's again thinking about like, does this really communicate why I should be using this product or what's really interesting about it? I think some people, like you asked me at the beginning of this, what is followup.cc, like what does it do? And I said it's the easiest way to embed a reminder in an email. Now, that is functionally true. I probably should have said it's the easiest way to never lose an email, right? I mean, in terms of like more kind of common language that people understand and that they might have felt the pain of, that should be, or I should say, persistence pays, right, is kind of my tagline. Because I've had numerous people tell me that when they keep using follow-up, they end up closing sales because they literally just persisted on following up. And that's like the beauty of following up. We all know in sales, that's what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the psychology thing is interesting. I think the biggest mistake is that people can look at success examples as templates, but then you really have to think through, does that apply to your product or what's different? Because you see this, right, ignoring just the talk of growth for a sec, you see this all the time is in businesses, right? You see the social network comes out and then everyone tries to build a piece of the social network. Because they said, I'm going to do photos better. I'm going to do groups better. I'm going to do chat or messages better. And then what ends up happening is they end up turning into a social network nowhere near as big, and like they totally lost focus. Same thing when people saw Pinterest and they were like, so like I thought about it for follow-up. I was like, oh, should I have a Pinterest page? And I was like, what am I going to pin? Like, I was like, I don't know, like I could make a board of pins that people want to follow up on, but it's like I already do that actually. That's a piece of the product. You can follow up on a URL actually. Anyways, so the thing is I just think people need to people need to look at templates and look at them as inspiration for ways to think about what would work in their business. And honestly, by the way, one of the most interesting things I've had is when you talk to VCs, and granted, I know like that's not possible for everyone, but one thing I really like about VCs is they see so many startups and they see so many business models. They are very good at distilling down like what is this model or what is this way that they're doing things differently, because that's their job, right? Their job is to evaluate that and figure it out. And so I almost want people to think like a VC when they're looking at strategies for growth and product innovation and things like that. It's like, okay, you're going to see other stuff out there, but how does it really work in your product? If you just copy it, it probably won't work.
No, that's great advice. Let me ask you one last question, Chris. This has been an awesome interview. What's the best advice that you ever received from somebody about growing a product? Has there been any sage, Yodas in your life to guide you along?
Oh, that's a good one.
Or you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps? It's all you.
No, I mean, certainly I've talked to a lot of people over time. I think I'm going to have to go back and just like say that Noah Kagan is probably one of the best people for advice, because he distills it down to just what it really is. And he just always said to me, he's like, don't worry about what anyone thinks. He's like, just do it. Just put it out there, right? And it's both the notion of trying things and just to say put that energy into it and stop worrying about it. Because someone once told me that I was overthinking like what would happen if I put out this feature or this growth this growth test or whatever, or this ad, and he was like, stop talking yourself out of doing things that you don't know how people are going to react, right? He's just like, just do it and just put it out there, because I think this is true in general now with the internet world. It's like, if you don't put yourself out there constantly, you'll never go anywhere. You'll never build a name. You'll never build a brand. And I say this even to people who want to start a blog. I'm like, go build your personal brand. Put yourself out there. Start writing. Don't be shy about promoting yourself within reason. Don't go nuts. Even though, as you know, Path now is getting called out for spamming all their users again. But as they said, no one cares. Yeah. Someone gets annoyed, but who cares about the headlines? So yeah, I just think that's the main thing, is just put yourself out there and don't be shy to talk about yourself and what you're doing, because it applies both to your personal life, your business life, everything.
That's awesome. Again, Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and being on Growth Hacker TV.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This was great.